Rain poured down on the quiet city street, the kind that blurred car lights into rivers of color. Jacob pulled his worn jacket tighter, hurrying his little daughter Emma under the flickering street lamp. They were heading home from the grocery store when he saw her, a young woman, curled up against a brick wall, soaked, trembling, and clutching her leg. Her expensive suit was torn, her hair tangled, and her eyes, filled with terror. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk," she whispered as he approached. Jacob froze, taken aback by her fear. He noticed the twisted angle of her ankle and the blood trickling down her knee. She looked nothing like the confident, powerful woman he'd once seen on billboards, the face of a major corporation in town. Now, she was just another human being, broken and scared. Emma tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, she needs help." Jacob knelt beside the woman, his voice soft but firm. "You're safe now. I won't hurt you." The woman's breathing slowed, her trembling eased. He gently lifted her, ignoring the rain soaking through his clothes. As he carried her toward his old pickup truck, something in her eyes changed, a flicker of disbelief mixed with relief. For the first time in a long while, the woman who once commanded boardrooms was entirely dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Jacob didn't know her story, and she didn't know his. But at that moment, none of that mattered. All he knew was that she needed him, and he couldn't walk away. Jacob drove through the storm with one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently steadying the injured woman in the back seat. Emma sat beside her, clutching a small towel they'd found in the truck, dabbing softly at the woman's face. "You're gonna be okay, miss," Emma said, her little voice filled with innocent compassion. The woman nodded weakly, whispering, "Thank you," before her head rested against the seat. When they reached Jacob's small farmhouse at the edge of town, he carried her inside as if she weighed nothing at all. The old wooden floor creaked beneath his boots, and the warm light from the fireplace filled the room with a soft glow. Jacob carefully placed her on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "I'll call a doctor," he said, but she grabbed his wrist. "Please, no hospitals." Her tone was desperate, eyes filled with something deeper than pain, fear. Jacob hesitated but nodded. He'd seen fear like that before, back when his wife was still alive, back when they'd run from things that couldn't be seen but felt in every heartbeat. "All right," he said gently. "You can stay here until you're ready." He cleaned her wound with the care of someone who had patched up too many broken things in his life. As the storm raged outside, she finally whispered, "My name is Claire." He smiled softly. "I'm Jacob, and this little nurse here is Emma." For the first time, Claire smiled faintly. Something fragile, almost forgotten, began to stir inside her, hope. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm that filled the small farmhouse. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, resting on Claire's face as she slowly opened her eyes. The scent of coffee and pancakes drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the warmth of the fireplace. She tried to move but winced at the pain in her leg. "Easy there," Jacob said softly, appearing at her side with a cup of tea. "Doctor says you'll be fine in a few days if you rest." Her eyes widened. "You, called a doctor?" she asked anxiously. Jacob shook his head. "A friend. He keeps things private. You're safe." Relief washed over her features, but her eyes still carried secrets. As Emma brought over a plate of pancakes, Claire's heart softened at the little girl's smile. "You have a lovely home," Claire murmured. Jacob chuckled. "It's small, but it's enough for us." His words were simple, yet something about them hit her harder than she expected. She had spent years in luxury, penthouse suites, designer offices, power lunches, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe, or seen. Over breakfast, Emma talked about her school, her friends, and how she missed her mom. Jacob's smile dimmed for a moment, but he kept listening. Claire watched him, this quiet man who carried so much sadness behind gentle eyes. There was no judgment in him, no curiosity about who she was or why she'd been alone on that rainy street. For the first time in years, Claire felt human again, not a CEO, not a headline, just a person who mattered. Over the next few days, Claire began to heal, not just her leg, but something deeper. Jacob fixed a small desk near the window so she could sit comfortably, and Emma would bring her wildflowers from the yard every morning. They talked about simple things, how the rain made the soil smell rich, how Emma wanted to be a doctor someday, how Jacob once dreamed of opening a small mechanic shop before life turned him into a full-time father. Claire listened quietly, her heart softening with every story. She had built her life on walls, contracts, deadlines, security teams, but in this little house, she learned what it meant to trust again. One afternoon, as she helped Emma with her homework, a news alert flashed on Jacob's old TV. Local CEO missing after corruption scandal surfaces. Her picture filled the screen. Jacob turned down the volume and looked at her calmly. "That's you, isn't it?" he asked softly. Claire's breath caught. I didn't do what they're saying," she whispered, tears brimming. "My partner framed me when I tried to expose him." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then you did the right thing." His words were simple, but they hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. No one had believed her, not her board, not her so-called friends. But this man, who barely knew her name a week ago, did. For the first time, Claire cried openly. Jacob didn't try to stop her. He just sat beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder, while Emma quietly placed a flower in her palm, a gesture so small, yet so full of grace. Days turned into weeks, and Claire's strength slowly returned. Her cast was removed, and she began walking again with Jacob's help. Each step hurt, but it also reminded her she was still alive, still capable of moving forward. One chilly morning, she stood on the porch, watching Jacob fix his old truck while Emma played with their dog in the yard. For the first time in years, she felt peace, not the kind that came from success or money, but from belonging. Yet deep down, she knew she couldn't hide forever. "Jacob," she said quietly, "I need to go back, to face the truth." He didn't look up, just nodded. "I figured you would. But remember, whatever happens, you're not alone anymore." She smiled, her throat tightening. The day she left, Emma hugged her tightly, whispering, "You helped Daddy smile again." Tears filled Claire's eyes. She had come into their lives broken and afraid, yet somehow she had healed them too. At the courthouse a week later, Claire stood tall as she presented evidence that exposed her corrupt partner. The truth finally came out, she was innocent. Reporters surrounded her as she left the building, cameras flashing, voices shouting. But she didn't stop. Instead, she drove straight back to that little farmhouse outside town. When Jacob opened the door, his surprised smile said more than words could. "Told you I'd walk again," she said, tears glistening. He laughed softly. "Yeah, but I didn't expect you to walk back here." Spring had arrived, painting the fields around Jacob's farmhouse in soft greens and golds. Claire had decided to stay in town, using her resources and connections to start a small foundation, one that helped single parents and struggling families get back on their feet. She named it Emma's Hope, after the little girl who'd shown her the purest kind of love. Every weekend, she'd visit Jacob and Emma, bringing fresh groceries, laughter, and sometimes just quiet companionship. Jacob still worked at his garage, still wore the same old jacket, but his eyes held a new light, peace, perhaps, or gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat on the porch watching Emma chase fireflies. "Funny," Claire said softly, "I used to think success was about power, now I see it's about purpose." Jacob glanced at her, smiling. "Maybe you just needed to fall to see how strong you really are." Claire's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I didn't just fall, Jacob. I was caught, by you." He didn't respond with words, instead, he reached for her hand, and for a moment, the world felt still, as if even the wind was listening. Emma ran up, laughing, fireflies in her palms. "Look! They glow like magic," she said. Claire looked at her, then at Jacob, and whispered, "It is magic." In the glow of that golden evening, 3 hearts that had once been broken found their way to healing, proof that kindness, even from a stranger, can rewrite the story of a life.